In Chapter 3, we just need to review a very important concept called elasticity. The first elasticity we need to review is the so-called price elasticity of demand. Sometimes I call it PEoD. It is only one kind of elasticities out there. There are several other elasticities we will consider in the chapter. But still, the price elasticity of demand is what we need to understand the best. And what it says is basically this epsilon, this elasticity, is the percentage change, this delta, in quantity demanded divided by the percentage change, the delta, in the price. So what it's trying to tell us is how much the quantity demanded will respond to some change in the price. Right? In other words, it's basically the responsiveness of quantity demanded to price. That's what the price elasticity of demand is trying to measure for us. Now, let's say for 1% increase in the price, if the price elasticity of demand is -3, then we know the quantity demanded will decrease by 3%. So 1 times -3 is -3%. The next thing we need to know is basically there are levels of different elasticity. The threshold is 1. If the demand elasticity is less than 1, then we call it inelastic, especially on a straight line demand curve, right? When it is at the bottom of the demand curve, hitting the horizontal axis, we have something called perfectly inelastic. The elasticity of demand is 0 here. And on the top of this demand curve, we have something called perfectly elastic. If you lower the price a little bit, the quantity will change in percentage in infinite amount. Okay, will increase in infinite amount because the base was 0. Because at $4, right, there's 0 quantity demanded, but if you lower it a little bit to $3.99, the quantity increase a lot. In terms of percentage, that increase is infinite. So at the top, we have something called perfectly elastic. In the middle of a straight line demand curve, we have something called unitary elastic, but that's just a concept. The threshold is -1. If the elasticity is less than -1, in other words, if the absolute value of the elasticity is a big number higher than 1, then the demand is elastic. If the elasticity is higher than -1, or say in absolute value, it is smaller than 1 and still above 0, then it's called inelastic. What it says is basically price change a little bit, demand doesn't change much. Or even say you increase the price by 50%, quantity demanded still does not decrease a lot. That's inelastic demand. And when you increase the price a little bit, quantity demanded decreased by a large portion. That's elastic. So we can compare two demand curves. Okay, look at two demand curves. Demand curve D1 is this flatter demand curve. It's not as steep as demand curve D2. And when you have a flatter demand curve, in general, we say this demand is more elastic. If you have a steeper demand curve like D2, for this one, we generally say it's inelastic. It's less elastic. And let me draw it for you. So let's say the price increased by a little bit. Okay. And then for D2, this will be the new quantity demanded. For D1, the new quantity demanded is here. So for the same price increase, let's increase the price by this amount. The quantity demanded on D2 dropped a little, but the quantity demanded on D1 decreased a lot. And that's why we say the quantity demanded on D1 is more responsive than the quantity demanded on D2. So from this point, from the same starting point, right, we have a elasticity that is higher on D1 than that is on D2. In the extreme case, when this demand curve is completely flat, horizontal, it has an infinite negative elasticity. It's infinitely negative. It's so-called perfectly elastic. And what's going to happen is that if you increase the price a little bit, all this demand go away, go from any quantity you can sell to zero. So it's perfectly elastic. That is the extreme case for this flatter demand curve. And for this steeper demand curve, the extreme case is this vertical demand curve. Right? And if you have a vertical demand curve, the elasticity is zero. Everywhere on this demand curve, it is perfectly inelastic. And for essential goods, right, the necessities, you have to have it. You basically have a inelastic demand curve, perfectly inelastic demand curve. And that's how much we need to understand for Chapter 3's elasticity of demand.